I used to think that no matter how far she'd gone, she'd come back on the day of her father's funeral. But instead, she sent a message. "Today is Mike's birthday. I hope you understand." No call, no apology. And that very night, I changed my will. I wasn't angry. It's just, if she's chosen to turn her back, then I won't keep the door open anymore. What happened after that wasn't revenge. It was a boundary. Clear, final, and if you think that's where the story ends, wait until she comes back. Not to say sorry, but to face something real. Just because someone's your mother doesn't mean she'll wait forever. If you're here because these stories touch something real and you find yourself relating, leave a like and hit subscribe. It helps me keep telling these stories and helps you not miss the ones worth hearing. Now then, take a seat. Take a deep breath. Let me tell you a story. I started making tea, not because I was thirsty, but because my hands weren't used to being empty. The kettle David, my husband, used was still on the stove. I turned on the gas. The smell of fire catching on old metal. The faint trace of chamomile still lingering somewhere. I rummaged through the closet looking for the burgundy tie. David liked that one. A neatly folded dress shirt. The gray suit hangs in its plastic cover. I ironed the sleeves again, even though no one would be looking at them anymore. That morning, the funeral home called twice. So did the church. They said the letter had been sent, the time and date confirmed. My voice didn't shake, but my eyes, they wouldn't stop resting on that cup of tea. Still warm. 2 white porcelain cups, one with a chipped handle, the other yellowed with age. I still poured 2 servings. One for me. One for the empty chair across from me. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath my feet. I checked the clock. 4 o'clock. The shadows from the front yard fence had begun to stretch long. David used to say, "This is the most beautiful light of the day." Now he was lying in the cold room. And I was still adjusting each button on his shirt to make sure it sat just right. I sat down. My eyes landed on the dining table, where his notebook still lay open. A dried sprig of lavender pressed between the pages. The radio was still on. No steady storytelling voice today, just a low static hum, and the wind threading through the curtains. I found myself wondering, how can someone die when the house stays exactly the same? I didn't cry. Everything just felt hollow. I poured a little more tea. That was enough. A quiet afternoon. Before the world shifted color, I was getting ready to head to the funeral home when my phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. "Mom, I'm sorry, I can't come home. Today is Mike's birthday. His family's throwing a party. I hope you understand." I read it 3 times. No mention of Dad. No word like funeral. Just birthday. And hope you understand. I still remember it clearly 2 days before David passed. I called to let Sarah know. She didn't answer the first 3 times. On the 4th, Mike picked up. I kept it brief. "Your father's critical. If you want to see him one last time, it's now." Mike answered calmly, like it wasn't serious. "I understand. But Sarah's picking out a dress for the party." I sat there in silence for a moment, then replied, my voice colder. "You can always choose another dress. But you don't get to choose another person." I hung up. My hand is still resting on the warm cloth laid across David's forehead. He moved his lips slightly, whispering, "Has Sarah come home yet?" I couldn't tell him the truth. I just gently stroked his brow. And for the first time in my life, I lied. "She's on her way." I set the phone down on the table. The wooden surface felt slightly damp. The screen was still lit, casting a soft blue glow over the back of my hand, dry and veined. I didn't say anything else, just held my hand a little tighter from the cold. That night, I made tea again, looked at David's photo, those trusting eyes, and wondered if there was anything more cruel than knowing your father was dying and still choosing cake over coming home. Not forgetting. Choosing to stay out of it. I wasn't angry, just painfully aware that I'd reached the very end of what a mother can give. In my mind, David's footsteps still echoed as they always had. His voice called, "Is Sarah home yet?" Her laughter from the kitchen. "I'm here, Dad. Don't rush me." I still keep the dress she left behind in the closet. The stitching along the back came undone. I meant to fix it once, but I let it be, because deep down, I believed she'd come back for it. The late afternoon light was beginning to fade. David's chair was tilted slightly to one side. I reached over and straightened it. We lived for that girl. Every visit was an occasion for him to cook her favorite meals. That one time, David even taught himself to make pasta. Just because Mike, Sarah's fiancé, liked Italian food. And now, Mike's birthday mattered more than her father's funeral. I wasn't angry. Just felt like I had closed a door, and no one was standing on the other side. I got up and poured out the remaining tea from the second cup. Only one seat left, and one person remembering. After Mike's cold response, that night I sat at the landline. The amber nightlight cast a soft glow across the old wooden desk. I looked at the contact list. My hand hovered over the speed dial for S. Then I pulled it back. Checked the clock. 10:17 p.m. Placed a finger on the receiver and gently let go. Not out of anger, but because, this time, there was nothing left to say that Sarah would want to hear. The next day, the last evening, before he could no longer open his eyes, I sat in the armchair beside his bed. David stirred now and then, eyes barely open, his hand reaching out for mine. I took it gently. He whispered, barely audible, "Don't try to call her if she doesn't want to come. You have to keep living." I nodded. But deep inside, I still held on to the thought maybe Sarah would come home. But he knew. And he forgave her, even before she chose not to show up. Early the next morning, as I stepped outside to collect the mail from the funeral home, Mrs. Margot, the neighbor who lives alone at the end of the street, had just parked her cart by the curb. She looked up at me, opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then simply gave a soft nod. I nodded back. We stood in silence for a moment. Then she finally spoke, almost like whispering to herself. "I remember he used to come help me change the light bulbs. No one else ever did it quite like he did." I smiled, just a small, tired smile. Not because of the story, but because the storyteller still remembered. She pressed a small bag into my hand. "Apple pie. I made it a bit sweet, but David liked it that way." I took it. Didn't say thank you. Just gave her hand a gentle squeeze and went back inside. On the day of David's funeral, I chose a simple black dress, low heels, and pinned my hair back neatly. Not dressed up the way David used to like. The church was full, but the seat beside me was empty. All eyes turned to it. No one said a word, but I could hear the silence loud and clear. Elise, a distant relative, gently patted my shoulder, then stepped back and shook her head. I lowered mine. Not to cry, just to avoid those pitying looks. The church bells rang. Each chime pushed me further from something I used to believe in so deeply. That my daughter, no matter how far gone, would come home on the day of her father's farewell. A longtime friend of David's leaned in and whispered behind me. Did she know? I heard him clearly, but I didn't answer. My hands gripped David's portrait tighter, the wooden frame trembling slightly beneath my fingers. When the priest read the final blessing, I turned one last time toward the church doors. Still empty. No one came running in late. No frantic footsteps. No one soaked in rain, bursting into tears. Just an absence so sharp, it hurt to look at. I stood and walked to David's casket. In my pocket, I carried a handkerchief Sarah once embroidered. The words "Daddy" were stitched crookedly, with uneven, clumsy thread. I placed it gently on David's chest. No one saw. Not out of forgiveness, not out of hope, but because I had once been a mother. And he had once been a good enough father. That evening, I stopped by the bakery at the end of the street. I saw Lena, an old friend still in her usual seat by the window with the gray striped curtain, flipping through a worn notebook. We had gone to a book reading together 5 years ago. A novel about war and mothers who lost their sons but never had a proper funeral. I had only meant to buy some cookies for the guests after the service. She looked up, nodded softly, and patted the chair beside her. I sat down. She slid a cup of tea toward me. No one spoke. The only sounds were the ticking of the wall clock and the soft clink of a knife tapping against a porcelain plate. I unwrapped a cookie, my hands trembling slightly. Crumbs fell onto my black dress. Lena marked something off in her notebook with a pen. Outside, the streetlights had just flicked on. We sat there for a while. Then she said, "Widows have this in common. It's not just a person you lose. It's the way the world looks at you after." I didn't answer, just exhaled, slowly. Lena opened her purse and pulled out a tissue. But she didn't cry. We called each other by name for the first time in years. We didn't talk about the past, only about the things that were no longer there. As I stood to leave, she said very quietly, "Missing it once is enough to miss it forever." I didn't respond, just nodded. Once, slowly, leaving the bakery, I held a small box of cookies in one hand, and something else, something still faintly warm in the other. I walked home, taking the same familiar old street. On the way, I stopped by the church to return the funeral register. The priest gave me a nod. He looked at me not with pity, not with questions, but with a steady gaze that didn't look away. Outside, a few familiar faces saw me standing in the courtyard. Elise, the distant relative, passed by, then turned back hesitantly. "About Sarah, I just want to say, no one ever fully understands another person's reasons, but..." She paused for a moment, then said quietly, "But if you don't show up to your own father's funeral, there's nothing left to justify." I didn't answer, just looked down at my hands, still holding the list of attendees from that day. Sarah's name wasn't on it. That afternoon, Frank, an old friend of David's, called me. His voice was low, but steady. "I don't mean to intrude on family matters, but if you need a witness, I can confirm it. That David waited for her. Until the very end." I thanked him. Quietly. A short post started to circulate on Facebook from one of Sarah's former classmates. It didn't go viral. It wasn't harsh. Just a single line. "We once learned about gratitude. Never thought someone would forget their own father to celebrate a fiancé's birthday." I didn't share it, didn't comment. But I saw clearly, even when you say nothing, there are people in the world who still carry a piece of justice for you. Mike and Sarah came to the house the following evening. Leather jackets. A bottle of red wine in hand. Not a single word about David. "We thought you could use a drink," Mike said. "Sarah mentioned you haven't been sleeping well." I took the wine and set it on the kitchen shelf. Unopened. No reply. Mike started talking about the party. Soft lights, cake, how Sarah laughed all night. He said it like a breeze brushing past. I don't really like going to dark, depressing places like that. Sarah cut in. "Anyway, a funeral is just a formality. Mom, don't make it a big deal." I looked at Sarah, then turned to him silent. In my mind, David came back to me. The man who checked the windows every night, who never forgot Sarah's birthday, who always held my hand when crossing the street. And Mike, standing there in our old kitchen, awkward like a stranger, unsure of where to even set the wine glass down. I didn't need to compare them. The distance between them spoke for itself, Cold, empty, and impossible to bridge. I stood up and left the dining table. The study still held the faint scent of old paper and David's peppermint cologne. I opened the safe, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled out a stack of documents. Among them was one of David's old notebooks. His handwriting always neat, slightly slanted, never erased. The leather cover had faded, but the title was still clear. For Sarah. I opened the first page. Sarah, age 3. I burned the pancakes. She rolled on the floor laughing, still saying, "Daddy makes the best pancakes." I believed her. Or tried to. I turned to the second page, eyes tracing each line. Age 5. Heavy rain. She ran into my room and crawled under the blanket. Only said one thing, "Daddy, don't go." I closed my eyes for a moment, then turned the next page. Age 8. I refused to buy her the puppy she wanted. She was allergic to pet fur. She didn't speak to me for 3 days. I paused again. My lips moved unconsciously as I read the next entry aloud. Age 16. First heartbreak. She didn't eat, didn't cry. I left a glass of milk by her door. Next morning, the glass was empty. Not a word. The last page was blank. Only a single, small dot. Nothing more. Maybe he knew. The things left unwritten are often the ones that hurt the most. Tucked into the back of the notebook was a child's drawing, scribbled in crayon, something Sarah had made when she was little. A picture of the 3 of us standing together beneath a tree. Me, David, Sarah, and our cat Lucy. Below the drawing, written in clumsy, crooked handwriting, Sarah's family, together forever. I didn't cry. I just closed the notebook gently as if folding away a piece of memory. Because the deepest pain wasn't that Sarah didn't come home. It was knowing that she had once loved deeply and had since learned to feel nothing. Inside the drawer beside me was the printed will neatly formatted. David's signature is steady and clear at the bottom. He had left nearly half of everything to Sarah. No conditions, no footnotes, not a single mention of Mike. I read it again, slowly. Each word pressed heavier on my eyes, not because of the amount, but because of the unwavering trust David had placed in his daughter, trust that Sarah never returned. I set the paper down, my heart heavy. David always believed Sarah would come back, but he never lived to see that day. A few days later, I invited Lena over for tea. Same old table corner. 2 white porcelain cups. Lena didn't ask anything. She just looked at me for a long moment, then quietly set her phone on the table. The screen lit up with a status update from Sarah's account. Mike left, called off the engagement. Don't ask me why. The image had already spread. Sarah standing alone in an empty apartment. No cake. No one by her side. I said nothing, just stared at the screen for a moment, then closed it. Not surprised. And Sarah, after everything, had nothing left to hold on to. I picked up my own phone. My finger scrolled down until it landed on a name. Thompson. My high school friend. Now the head of one of the largest law firms in Arizona. We met on a quiet, drizzly morning. His office was small, tidy. The scent of fresh paper, mingling with the fading trace of old coffee in the air. He slid the will across the desk to me, flipped through a few pages, then looked up. His voice was calm but direct. David had full authority to write his will while he was alive. But you also have the right to decide what happens with your own share. He paused, then continued slower, more deliberate. If you want, you can set conditions. Or redirect it entirely. To protect what David left behind. I didn't respond right away. My eyes lingered on David's signature. So familiar, it hurt to look at. It wasn't that I didn't understand the law. It's that, now, the decision I had to make wasn't about paperwork. It was about my heart. I arranged to meet Sarah at a quiet cafe, far from the city center. I didn't want witnesses, and I didn't want interruptions. I walked down the stairs, past the laundry room. I saw Rosa, the housekeeper I'd hired when David first fell ill. She still came every Monday, even after the funeral. Without needing to be told, she would open the old wardrobe, take out David's shirts already clean, neatly stored since the day he passed, and refold each one. She folded them just right. The collar propped up, sleeves tucked exactly at the crease, then smoothed gently down the back. I once said to her, "Rosa, he doesn't need them anymore." She just replied, "I know, but if the shirts are neat, the memories feel neat too." I stood in silence, watching her fold another shirt, the gray one David used to wear on Sunday afternoon walks. While she worked, I noticed an old sweater had been folded by mistake into the linen drawer. It was the one Sarah had knit. Rough stitches, uneven sleeves, the neckline puckered. But David wore it every Christmas, even when it wasn't cold. I picked it up, then set it back down. No need to wash it. No need to wear it again. But it still needed to be kept, as a reminder that once, a child had loved deeply enough to make something with her own two hands, before she forgot how. I didn't say anything else. I walked to the bus stop for the ride to our meeting place. On the way, I passed Mrs. Mary, the woman who ran the little grocery store at the end of the block. She saw me and asked softly, "Haven't you seen your husband come by for tea lately?" I answered gently, "He's not here anymore." She nodded, her voice slowing. "He used to ask me if the chamomile tea had come in. Some days he stopped by 3 times. He said, 'No rush.' But my wife likes it." I stood there, because I couldn't remember if I had ever thanked him for that. And now, it was too late. The bus arrived. I stepped on, headed for the place I had agreed to meet Sarah. She arrived 15 minutes late. Designer coat, polished shoes, phone in hand like she was about to live stream. Not even a hello. I looked her straight in the eyes. "I'm not angry that you didn't come home. I just want to know, when your father was lying cold in the morgue, what were you thinking?" She rolled her eyes and sighed. "Mom, I already told you. Mike's birthday was really important. His family invited over 100 people. I couldn't just leave in the middle of it." I said nothing. I waited. She fidgeted, then added quietly, "Mike said if I left, it would make things awkward. It'd ruin the mood." I laughed. "But not because anything was funny. Awkward? Because your father died?" She looked away, silent. I lifted my coffee cup. My hand didn't tremble. "So you chose to protect your fiancé's image. And your father was just an inconvenience to be kept quiet. No apology. No tears." I stood up, my voice calm. "If your father were still alive, he would forgive you. But he's not, and I'm not a saint." I walked away, didn't look back, because from now on, I'm not even sure whose mother I still am. A week after the funeral, I met with the lawyer to finalize the documents. Mr. Thompson handed me a stack of papers. I signed, then paused at a small note at the bottom. Notice of inheritance was sent to the designated heir, Sarah Montgomery, on March 3rd. I asked softly, "She knows?" He nodded, voice low. "Yes, both the letter and email were sent." Sarah opened them. I didn't ask anything else. Just tightened my grip on the handle of my purse. My hands were cold. That night, I brewed tea and looked at David's photo, his eyes full of quiet trust, and asked myself one more time, is there anything more cruel than knowing your father is dying and still choosing cake over coming home? It wasn't accidental. She chose to stay out of it. I'm not angry. I just clearly see I've reached the very limit of what a mother can bear. I went back home, walked down a small street, past the old pharmacy, where a wooden table stood with a handwritten sign, Raisin Bread 1. An old blind man named Lacob sat there every Friday afternoon. David used to stop by to buy bread. Not because he liked the bread, but because he cared about the man selling it. After David passed away, I kept coming back. Every week. Bought a loaf. Didn't eat it. Just brought it home, placed it on the shelf, and discarded it after 3 days. Rosa once asked me, "Why do you keep buying it if you don't eat it?" I just said, "Because I don't want him to be the only one keeping his promise." That day, I invited Lena over. She glanced at the dining table and softly asked, "Still setting 2 bowls?" I nodded. Lena smiled gently. "It's different for me. My husband passed, and my son didn't come back. Since then, I only set 1 bowl. I'm not angry, but I don't set extra anymore." I looked down at my hands. Wanted to say something, but the words caught in my throat. Lena continued, her eyes gazing out into the yard. "Some gaps don't need to be filled. You just have to leave space to remember. And never repeat it with yourself." Lena left, and I sat alone in the living room. They lay on the table, beside our wedding photo, David smiling, eyes fixed on me like the whole world was at peace. I stared at the photo for a long time, then looked at my phone. Still silent. No messages from Sarah. No calls. No sign of her after that cold meeting. I wasn't angry anymore. Just felt like I was living with a stranger who wore my daughter's face. Sarah was now a different woman. Independent, busy, indifferent, and cold. No longer the little girl who held my hand, tears welling up when her father traveled for work. I quietly sat down at David's old wooden desk, picked up the old will again. The paper yellowed with age, but David's handwriting remained strong and steady. He wrote, "The estate is to be divided equally between wife and daughter. The final decision rests with Eleanor." No one blamed him. He passed away, still believing his daughter knew where home was. I took the pen, silently wrote a new will, word by word. My share I leave to a small charity that David used to donate to quietly. The rest I won't make Sarah lose it. But I attach a condition, not about the funeral, not about the parties. The estate will be transferred on one condition. The heir must maintain ties with family and respect the values David Montgomery left behind. Just a simple sentence. The recipient must have stood by the giver when they needed it most. Nothing too difficult. Just remember where you come from. And don't erase the name of someone who once was your father. I put the original will into an envelope, signed my name under the yellow light, then placed it beside a letter David had left unfinished. For the first time in months, my hand didn't tremble. If she can't understand what her father left behind, I will be the one to clear the path. This time, I wrote it my way. Clearly, decisively. No more waiting. Outside, the rain started, but it wasn't heavy. I poured myself a cup of tea, no longer making 2 servings. This time, I didn't feel lonely. Only one thing was clear finally. I had made the right choice. Not to leave money, but to leave limits. I opened the closet and took out the wool scarf David bought on a trip to Oregon. The scarf was slightly fuzzy, worn at the edges, but still smelled of lavender pressed in the drawer. Wrapping it around my neck, I briefly remembered. Sarah used to wrap this scarf around herself when she had a slight fever at 12. David carried her to the clinic. It was raining. They were both soaked. I sat down on the bed, holding the edge of the scarf. I didn't cry. I just whispered to myself, "You were once wrapped warmly, but I don't know how to keep anyone else warm anymore." One afternoon, I was walking outside when the rain came down hard. I hurried to take shelter under the porch next to Mr. Lacob. He didn't turn around, still wrapping bread, 1 piece at a time. His hands shook, but steadily. Unexpectedly, he spoke, his voice slow and warm. "I can't see people, but I know who is still in pain, who has let go." I didn't answer. He turned toward me gently. "Today your hands aren't cold anymore." I squeezed my fingers lightly. For the first time in many years, I didn't need to hide my hands in my coat pockets. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I understood sorrow, when held properly, will gradually dissolve. That afternoon, Lisa, the little girl next door, came knocking. Her arms held a paper bag, her eyes sparkling. "I have waffles. Would you like some?" I invited her in. No questions asked. Just the two of us. One pot of tea. Lisa talked nonstop about school, about the cat named Miso, about her parents arguing, and then cleaning the house together. I just nodded, occasionally smiling. No effort needed, no hierarchy. Kindness, I suddenly realized, doesn't have to bear your name. That day, Sarah was cleaning out the old bookshelf after moving into her small rented apartment. Mike was gone. Half the closet was empty. No more birthday cakes, no more parties. When she took out the last paper box, she found David's notebook. Brown leather cover, corners slightly worn. It had once been in his study, but later got lost. Sarah opened it. The first pages were trivial notes. Watch battery replacement schedule, tea brewing recipe, a list of books to buy. On the last page, the handwriting changed thicker, straighter. It was a letter addressed to herself. No date, no occasion. Just one single line standing alone in the middle of the page. "Even if you take the wrong path, if you turn back, your father will still light the way for you to come home." Sarah sat down, didn't cry, just closed the notebook slowly with both hands. Didn't throw it away, didn't blame. She read every line. Silent. One afternoon, Sarah returned to the old neighborhood. Not to find anyone, just passing by. Old man Lacob was still sitting there. His hands touched each coin, distinguishing them by feel. Sarah stopped. "I want to buy a loaf of bread." He didn't look up, only said, "Your voice sounds very much like a woman who used to stand here, every week, for 2 whole years. Didn't say much, but her hands were very cold at first." A moment of silence. Then he continued, "If you are her daughter, then don't miss out anymore." Sarah squeezed the loaf of bread in her hands, said nothing. Only knew that, for the first time in a long time, she had come back to that very street, and was reminded of someone who didn't ask her to be like anyone else, just to know how to come back. A few days later, Rosa told me. On Monday morning, near midnight, someone came to the door. Didn't knock, just stood there. I asked, "Did you see clearly?" No face, but I think it was Sarah. That figure, that way of standing, unmistakable. I said nothing, only remembered, last night I left the kitchen light on brighter than usual. A cup of tea I made then, didn't drink. The door didn't open, but I heard footsteps retreating. Slow, as if not wanting to leave yet. Early the next morning, I woke up early, holding a broom, looking out toward the fence by the road. The grass was pressed down, with faint footprints right where Sarah used to stand as a child calling David home from work. No doorbell rung, no message left. Only footprints remain, and a space no one fills. I didn't call, didn't write back. Just let everything stay as it was. Because there are people who, when they return, don't need anyone to open the door. They just need the door to still be there, and the light still on. A few days later, I sat across from Sarah in the lawyer's office. No more tears, no more anger. Only clear terms, line by line. This is the new will. I have signed it. I looked straight into her eyes. Your father's assets will be transferred if you fulfill all the listed conditions. No exceptions, no additions. Sarah held the paper, lips pressed tight. For the first time, I saw her gaze slow down. No argument. No sighs. We didn't hug. No reconciliation with a handshake. But something in Sarah's eyes softened a little. A thin yet genuine glimmer of understanding. One early autumn morning, I opened the mailbox. Among the advertisements and bills was a simple card, the cover printed with the words, "Thinking of you." No sender, no return address. Inside, only one line in black ink. There are things I thought were right, but now I'm not so sure. No signature. I folded the card, put it in the drawer next to David's photo. No questions, no mention. But I knew that handwriting, the broken strokes, the habit of leaning slightly left, it was Sarah's. Once, Sarah returned to the old neighborhood late one afternoon. She passed the old bakery. On the counter was a small photo, David and his mother at a fundraiser years ago. Below the photo was a handwritten line. We didn't have much, but we shared every little thing. Next to it was a flyer. Volunteer recruitment. David Scholarship Fund. Sarah took it, folded it, and put it in her bag, without saying a word. Then she walked on, stopping in front of the old house. She didn't knock, just stood and looked. No apologies, no explanations. Just a small action, but it said so much more. The late summer breeze blew gently. No one opened the door. But it was no longer absolute silence. I was no longer a mother. But I could still put my hand on someone's shoulder and say, "I understand." Near midnight that night, the landline suddenly rang. I hesitated, then picked up. At the other end, "Hello? Is that Sarah?" It was the voice of Mrs. Dixon, David's old friend, forgetful and frail. I paused for a moment, then whispered, "You have the wrong number." Mrs. Dixon sighed and hung up. I put down the receiver and sat quietly, just thinking, someone still calls the wrong Sarah. But no one calls me anymore. 3 months after reading the will, I officially launched the David Montgomery Scholarship Fund for women abandoned but unbroken. Nothing grand, just a big teapot, a few dozen wooden chairs, and stories no one had listened to enough. That day, I lost my voice. A slight sore throat, but I couldn't speak. Lena came early, still in her gray dress, hair neatly tied. When I signaled for her to read on my behalf, she just nodded. No explanation needed. The speech was short, but by the end, her voice was clear and strong. There are mothers who choose silence, not out of weakness, not out of forgiveness, but because they understood. No one is obliged to love you, but you have the right to stop waiting. After a moment, she placed her hand on my shoulder. No comfort, no explanation, just at the right time. And I knew if I am the image of today, then Lena is my reminder for the years ahead. That sometimes, walking alone toward the light is enough. That morning, many women came quietly, with stories that seemed forgotten by all. Julia arrived on an old bicycle, her hands also holding a small box of goods. She worked part-time as a cleaner, living in a room less than 15 square meters. When she received the scholarship invitation, she thought it was a mistake. "I only finished 8th grade, and I have 3 kids. No one calls me anymore." I handed her a stack of documents. No questions, no conditions. Just said, "This isn't a reward for the talented. It's a chance for those who never had one." When leaving, Julia turned back and bowed deeply. I saw in her eyes myself from a long time ago. The person who sat in the crowd, but no one asked if she was hungry. The second was Teresa, who entered wearing an ash-colored headscarf. A thin face, but a straight back. Her husband left after the doctor announced stage 3. She didn't apply for the scholarship for herself, but for her daughter, who still couldn't understand why her father never came back. I asked if she needed additional support. She shook her head. "Just a quiet library, and a place where my daughter knows her mother was strong." I wrote nothing more. Just check the box. Full scholarship awarded, no conditions. And Lila sat silently, hands resting on a barely visible belly. She was only 18, kicked out of her house for bringing shame to the family. No tears, no excuses. I just asked, "Do you want to continue studying?" She nodded, softly, but firmly. I didn't ask about the child's father, didn't ask about mistakes. I only wrote her name on the third list. A small line underneath. Not everyone who errs deserves to lose their future. And I, Eleanor, don't need to have my name on any signboard. As long as each of them keeps moving forward, David still exists somewhere. Not on a tombstone, but in the way they lift their heads. A scholarship doesn't change the whole world, but sometimes it's enough to help someone not lose themselves. That day, Sarah arrived late. Sat in the back row, quietly. Beside her was Rosa. I remember the day David passed away. Many of his friends came, but few stayed. I sat still in a room full of whispers and the scent of white flowers. Mrs. Rosa didn't come close. Only near the end of the ceremony, she approached. No bow, no words. Just placed her hand on my shoulder, then handed me a small folded piece of paper. I opened it. It was David's handwriting. If that day Sarah doesn't come back, be the one to help her not fall. I folded the paper back, put it into the chest pocket of my shirt, not as a reminder, but to know there's still someone who didn't leave me behind. When I looked down, Sarah's eyes met mine without looking away. No apology, just silence. And I understood. She was listening, and for the first time, willing to take a small step forward. That afternoon, I returned home and stepped into the study. The bookshelf still had the last compartment intact, where I kept things I wasn't sure if I should keep. Inside, I found an old exercise book of Sarah's. 3rd grade. The cover was scratched. The first page had her name written in red-colored pencil, with crooked italics. Sarah Montgomery, grade 3. Mom is my best friend. The corner of the notebook had a piece of tape fixing a tear. I clearly remember that day. Sarah tore the notebook because she was angry that I didn't let her go to a friend's birthday party. I didn't scold her, just quietly taped it back together. The next day, she placed the notebook on my desk, flipped to the page with that sentence. She said nothing. And I wasn't angry either. We just held hands and walked to the bus stop together. Now, the notebook still remains. But I'm not sure the one who wrote that line still remembers writing it. That spring, I cleaned up the house, repainted, and replaced some potted plants by the gate. A small house, a narrow yard, but sunlight poured through the windows every morning. Lisa often stopped by after school. She told me stories about classmates, how her mom learned to bake cookies that never burned at the bottom, how the cat Miso scratched the curtains but was forgiven because it knew to fold its ears and apologize. We planted chrysanthemums. Sometimes a few new friends visited, bringing old books, orange jam, and stories unrelated to loss. No one mentioned Sarah. No one needed to. I had put down the pain not forgotten, but no longer carrying it. I didn't wait. But I left the door open. Because some children don't need forgiveness. Only someone wise enough not to erase them from the last memory.